When I was 14, I went with my mom to Ferry Beach, the Unitarian Universalist Conference Center on the coast of Maine, and we were there for 2 weeks that summer. The first week was a religious education week. My mom helped lead a class for directors of religious education. That was her job. And I went to a conference on masks, physical and emotional, with a bunch of adults. I'm sure they loved having me there. In the second week, she learned how to make an Adirondack chair and decompressed after teaching for a week. And I went to a conference called Pagan Pathways, also with adults. I remember that to prepare for the class, I read as much as I could of Margot Adler's book, Drawing Down the Moon, and magazine articles on paganism, because I didn't want to be way behind the other folks that would be in the conference with me. I assumed that we would be learning about paganism in an academic style, that there would be lectures and maybe some ceremonies, and I would have a good grasp on the history of paganism when I left. I was wrong. The women leading the class were active Wiccans, naturalists, and healers, and they taught paganism by doing. So we meditated, we drummed, we raised cones of power, and sometimes listened to short lectures. I left better connected with my body and spirit, which is pretty good for a teenager. And more than 30 years later, I still remember some of the meditations we did, the songs we sang, like the one we just sang. And I'm grateful to those women who welcomed me into that circle. While I am not Wiccan and am not trained in that tradition, I remain pretty well grounded as a pagan, a country person whose spiritual life is tied to the land and the rhythms of nature. In the celebrations and seasons throughout the wheel of the year, I've always been drawn to Beltane. I am a sucker for a good bonfire. And I am so grateful for the bloom of growing things around us that is spring. The name Beltane comes from Gaelic, meaning bright or shining fire. And Christopher Lafond, who we heard from earlier, shared with us back in 2020 a history of Beltane that may be helpful to share again. He wrote, "Beltane is one of the 4 fire festivals of Northern European pagans, along with Samhain near Halloween and All Saints' Day, Lunasa, which we celebrate when we celebrate the first harvest at the beginning of August, and in bulk in the first days of February, when we celebrate the sheep coming in milk as they prepare to give birth." Most people who are familiar with the idea of Beltane usually associate it with May 1st, but it's really a season. Even today in the Irish language, Beltane is used to refer to the month of May, not just the first day. Just as Samhain is used to refer to the month of November, not just October 31st and November 1st, and Lunasa refers to the entire month of August. Now, I should say as an aside, Chris is also an astrologer, so he spends a lot of time talking about the stars in this next bit, and it warms my heart to imagine him with his star charts thinking about this. There are a number of ways to figure the dating of Beltane. The most common way is May 1st, but before calendar changes a few hundred years ago, May 1st used to be the midpoint of the sun passing through the sign of Taurus. Today, it marks the middle of the spring, but in the northern cultures of the Celtic countries, it marked the beginning of the light half of the year. Most country folk, also known as pagans, however, would not have been paying that close attention to such things. But they might have watched the morning skies for the Pleiades rising just before the sun, which happens now in the middle of May in Ireland. Or they may have watched more simply for the blooming of the hawthorn to mark the occasion. Here in New England, the modern equivalent might be the blooming of forsythia. In our reading earlier from Chris, he mentioned that at Beltane we have the opportunity to take physical action to make those goals manifest. We plant the seeds, turn the soil, tend the bees and animals. It is always important to be grounded in our connection and interdependence with all that is. And when things are uncertain in our lives or out in the world, it's all the more important. We do not have control over life and death, but we can do our best to cultivate and support growth in our lives communities, and the world. For some, Beltane is a celebration of bodies and embodiment. In reflecting on Chris's words about this being a time to take action on solstice reflections and planning, I find it helpful to think about connection with my body and what I can do to be in better relationship to the land and others. It also helps to keep in mind Patricia Monaghan's pragmatism from our grace note this morning. Some things we plant and tend will not thrive, and we keep working and tending what we can. Back in January, almost solstice, when I was trying to plan how to respond to issues in the world, I said to a friend that if Reverend William Barber, leader of the Poor People's Campaign and Repairers of the Breach, asked me to do something, I would do it. And then last week, Tommy texted that he was starting a Moral Monday campaign in Washington to lift up the impact of the proposed federal budget on the poor. I had participated in his Moral Monday work in North Carolina, marching for voting rights there over 10 years ago. And I looked in my email after Tommy's text, and lo and behold, there was a message calling clergy to come and stand with him for the first Moral Monday action of this new campaign on the steps of the Supreme Court. I was already headed to a conference in DC for the week, and so Tad and I packed our robes and went. We stood with many clergy and lay people for singing and speeches and prayer at the Supreme Court, and then Barber's team got people lined up to go over to the Capitol to pray in the rotunda and deliver information packets to legislators about the impact of the budget on the vulnerable and a call to moral action. I was not planning to go into the Capitol. I was supposed to be presenting at a conference in mere hours and couldn't get arrested, but Tad was going to go in. As they got organized to walk over, I watched Dr. Barber confer with his team and get centered for moving to the Capitol. Folks were quiet, moving 2 by 2. When the line of maybe 50 people got to the Capitol entrance, they would only let 15 into the rotunda. The folks who were prepped and planning to make the flyer deliveries went in. Reverend Barber prayed quietly and was arrested and charged with demonstrating in the building, together with 2 other clergy. Barber, who is severely disabled, he walks with 2 canes, was handcuffed and let out. And they'll be back again tomorrow, gathering again and again, planting more seeds of compassion, moral courage, and interfaith connection and truth. What have we planned and committed to do with our bodies in this world that we can now put into action? What are the seeds that we plant, knowing that not all will grow? In this season of bright and shining fire, may we notice the fruit of past seeds planted, literally in the forms of plants, irises, lilacs, asparagus, and garlic, and trees leafing and fruiting around us. May we celebrate the past seeds planted in the form of love, compassion, care, and justice, and tend to that care. So may it be, and amen.